tonight's event, I'm super excited about this. Madonnalisa Chan from Salesforce is here. She's going to talk to us, and I think you're all going to really enjoy this because it's going to be a really nice conversation that she's planning to lead here to kind of close out our year. We've been as we finish a year and look ahead to the new year and think about kind of where our careers are and what we want to be doing with them and how we want to be doing our work, we have a really terrific speaker here to share on this topic. So she's going to talk about some of the tools that she has used in her career journey and talk about defining your personal values and how those can inform your professional goals. Just some of the hard and soft skills that you might need, talk a bit about networking and mentoring, and she has lots and lots of resources that she's planning to share. So please, as we go, put your questions in the chat. We're kind of hoping to make this fairly, I'm just realizing I'm probably sharing the wrong screen here, making this a fairly interactive conversation. So we will be sharing the questions with Madonnalisa as she goes, and she will pull you in. So go ahead and share your screen, Madonnalisa, and thank you for being here.
Thanks, Paula. Thanks everybody for joining us today. I'm really excited to be here and excited that I could share some of my own story with you. I want to confirm that you can see my screen correctly. Is that great? So as Paula said, I'm Madonnalisa Chan. My pronouns are she, her. This talk is going to be a bit more personal than the usual meetup. Remember, this isn't a strict list of things to do, but an overview of what worked for me. Just remember to pick and choose the parts that make sense to you in your stage of your career. And most importantly, I want you to have fun. So there will be moments where I will ask, we'll open it up for questions and we'll have something a little bit more like a conversation. I don't want this to turn into a lecture. So have you ever taken a moment to stop what you're doing and think about what you want from your career or how you're preparing for that next role? If you're a student, finding the right class and internship that shapes your path could be kind of daunting. And if you're early in your career, looking for that right job is very daunting, scary. And there's also a dash of FOMO. You know, you fear missing out. Someone else is doing something more exciting. If you're mid-career, it sometimes feels like some kind of fork in the road is hovering before you and forcing you to decide, you know, do I stay as an individual contributor? Do I go into management or leadership? If you're wondering these questions, I'm glad you're here. Let's unpack what skilling up means and how it benefits everybody, especially when it's done in community. Let's explore some of those methods for how we can approach understanding where we want to upskill or think about professional development. You as a whole person, with all your personal stuff, the messy stuff, the parts that make us excited, the stuff that gets us nervous. It's that time of the year where we are in that liminal space. We use this time to reflect, to pause, to understand the change in us, and it's a time that represents a passageway that is here and nowhere, that leads you from one place to another, waiting expectantly for new stuff around the corner, or actively pursuing what we want for in the new year. We want to make and hold space for ourselves. So with time and intention, you can focus on your needs and review your career, your life. It's okay to retreat into yourself and unpack the things. I give you permission. And that could be holding you back. Relearn the things you enjoy, reacquaint with what makes you who you are. A period of time for self-reflection is a time for renewal and rebirth. So early in my career, 20 plus years ago, I was very deep into the IA and UX world. After a few short years, I felt like I was burning out. I survived the first crash after being laid off just after an IPO that didn't happen. So in the first job after that layoff, I was working really, really hard. But back in those days, we actually had limited number of PTOs. I had not taken off any of that PTO for like at least 3 years and was maxing out. And I don't know about you, but HR was telling me, you got to use it or you're going to lose it. So in this situation, I actually took 30 days off. I went off alone, rented a cabin in a remote location, no computer, no phone, no TV, and just hung out. So I took that time off to understand whether or not my work had meaning and what impact I wanted to make. I used that time with intention to grieve some losses. It's okay to grieve a lost job, lost friendships because you were working so much. That original career timeline that you might have had in the first place when you first started working. I was trying to be mindful and set some days for scheduled work on myself and some days to just have fun. I kept it as organic as possible and I listened to myself and my heart, my mind, and my body. So, how does community play a role in this? Well, even though I wasn't directly with a community off in the remote location, I still made sure I talked to the people who owned the cabin, who just lived a few blocks away. I made a habit to go visit a local cafe and hung out with locals, reading the paper, sharing news about the neighborhood. You can still be in a community even as an introvert. I should know, that's me. I'm an introvert. It was nice to pick and choose when I wanted to be with others. So, what does this involve? I took that time off. I made that time. Some people can't take that 30 days off, but just taking a couple hours to yourself is just as important. What kind of tools will you need? You bring your emotional, mental stuff. You just use that time to unpack it. Find something to do as well, and bring something that you would want to write down with or take a camera to just document that experience. And I also brought a lot of books that would help me provoke me into like being uncomfortable, learning something new about myself. Of course, that genre could be anything. Don't limit yourself to self-help or business books. And don't forget, keep documenting. I still have my journals. Every single mundane thing, I wrote it down. Many years later, they remind me about how to be mindful, to have intention. I can look back not with only nostalgia, but at how much work it took to unpack what I wanted for myself and how to stay still and be aware. It gives you a trajectory of where you were and reminds you where you want to be, or give you a data point of where your head was in a particular context or time. Treat it like a love note or a blessing to your future self. Respond. So those 30 days forced me to tackle so many dimensions of my life: career, hobbies, spirituality, friendships of past and the future, you name it. I had lots of time to reflect on those things. But those days did pass quickly. I knew I needed more time and I wanted to be elsewhere to see the world with new eyes. I actually ended up quitting my job and living in another country where they didn't even know the language. I was done with being in my head and I needed to get out again. My response to that time to reflect was to take it to 11, force myself outside my comfort zone. So during this response time, I also wanted to create some opportunities to have this self-assessment. So what is a self-assessment? It's the act of or process of analyzing and evaluating oneself or one's action. While making time and holding space for yourself, it will take work to unpack who you are today and what has shaped you. This is the time when you actually want to identify your vision and values, what matters most to you. Without claiming those values, decision making will just feel overwhelming. Find ways to use your values to decide what matters to you. What gets you excited about this work? Look at your past reviews. Use that as data points for helping you understand what your values are or the skills that made you shine. What are the areas you want to grow? What are the areas you want to prune? What are your hard skills? What are your soft skills? The hard work in 30 days was only the beginning. In some way, I knew there was more that I could do to challenge myself, but I had to actually put myself out there. Could I shape the experience in something I could apply in my own work? What I ended up with was building a community in a new country. While learning a new language, I joined a group that had that shared love of language and food and culture. With a new church out there, I found others who were also sharing their story of self-discovery and adventure. And even in the UX and IA community, I found many lifelong friends who were also carving out communities of practice in that country. Just remember, don't do this alone. Find a trusted friend or a mentor to help you develop this 360 view of yourself. Have some objective feedback that can help you figure out your strengths and identify those opportunities for growth. If you are able, there are many tools that your HR or college career center offers in helping you identify your hard and soft skills. I've even used a tool called Strength Finder 2.0. which actually tries to help you unpack what your strengths are and actually make those shine in your project, in your work, in your team. Another tool that has helped me with my family is actually developing a vision board. It's basically a poster that contains visual images, stickers or pictures, or even cut out phrases that depict your goals and dreams. As a family, we did this, and it was a great exercise that we did at the end of the year, something to project for the next 3-5 years. Another activity that really helps is actually using those Scrabble or Bananagram tiles and just creating word clouds to actually project what your vision is and all your values. And then, of course, like I said, you definitely need to surround yourself with people who can give you good, honest, constructive insights on your decision-making process. Reach out to those people, cling to them. I also highly recommend Ferrazzi's book, Who's Got Your Back, as a way to explore building your trust circle. And another book that I really enjoyed that helped me think about feedback is Stone and Heen's Thanks for the Feedback. It's a great way to track, receive, and take action on feedback. So with your vision and values in hand, you now have some tools to help you shape your adventure. You can either go deep or wide. You can become an IC, a manager, or a consultant. Your adventure can go in so many directions. That decision can be overwhelming. I know, I've been there. Even recently, I've been consulting for like 18 years on my own, and only this summer I decided to go back in-house. The opportunity was amazing, and I knew that I could grow and stretch in my role. So previously I was doing a lot of the taxonomy work, content strategy work, a lot of IA and navigation work, and in this role I'm actually a product manager related to taxonomy and content services. So it ties a lot of the different things. But that was the thing over the last 20 years, is that there's different ways that you can actually approach where you want to go, deep or wide, IC or consultant. One of the things you need to keep in mind too is, like, what do you see in the market? What do you see in tech? What is emerging in business? What other roles or disciplines are interesting to you? And how can you get to investigate those? Are there volunteer opportunities where you can explore expanding your skills? What is your action plan? This is where you would actually try to figure out, drawing or outlining what that plan would look like for what that would be next. If anything, right now, write down the names of people you think can help you realize parts or all of that plan. I think that's the most important thing, is knowing that you can have a community that has your back. So most of what I've learned for each of these steps in my career was done in the edges of my work. And it helped me find new people in my network to actually understand what are other ways I can apply my skills or apply what I know. Each decision of even taking on a new project, I had to really think through, will I be learning something new? What will I bring to the table? And can I bring new opportunities for other people in terms of their learning? I wanted to take on projects where I knew would be outside my comfort zone. So here we are, the part where we dig deep into skilling up. You might recognize this image, right? The content strategy quadrant. The top two boxes represent editorial and experience in content design, and the bottom boxes represent structure and process in systems design. Brain traffic has been an amazing resource for many of us, and I value this diagram for coming when it did. So in my career journey, I've grown into many parts of this diagram. What I've noticed is that I get most pumped when I can actually touch all 4 parts. As an IC, as a consultant, leading or managing groups. There are times even when a client would only want 1 quadrant, but that was okay. So where do you sit in this diagram? What areas do you want to explore? Where do you feel like you can stretch a bit? Which areas do you inherit and now have to pick up a book or a course to help fill gaps in order to succeed? Now take the time, if you have a pencil or a whiteboard, draw 4 boxes on a piece of paper that represents this diagram. And I want you to actively write down in the quadrant, you are here. This is the place where you feel most comfortable or you spend most of your time. Now put a star where you want to go next. Now draw a line between you are here to that star. I'd love to see in the chat like what everyone is writing down from where you were before and where you'd like to go. And I'd love to open this time for like an actual conversation. So if you're willing to share, I'd love to hear. Okay, I see Annika says process to experience. So in this situation, if you're coming from process, you're really into how a system is developed, where, at what parts do you put in the content? How does it get taken out? How do you process that content? What are all the different guidelines to get that content into a system? And you want to move to experience. So experience is where we have the navigation of that content, the content design on a page or an experience. And I think in that situation, it comes to what are the organizing principles that help you go from knowing how the guts work of a system to like, what does a user want to see? In that kind of situation, this is where user research plays a good role, learning more from the IA world, the information architecture world, and the UX world, and how they marry content into the experience. I think one of the areas that is great is that you know how the systems work. And so you translate that into the actual navigation experience. You can actually do so much in advising in things like personalization or in dynamic delivery of content or in helping match up what those things would mean for targeted audiences and navigation for that audience. So I think that's an example of going from process to experience. I see from Elise, you said editorial to experience. That's a great one. So you might be focused on tone and voice. So you know your audience already. And you want to be able to see, well, how do I produce these experiences where they can actually leverage it? What do I present to our experience or to our users through an experience? I think in that case, that would be more learning, like I mentioned earlier, how does information architecture play in that experience? How does that tone and voice in writing the copy and structuring the copy in a certain way could support the goals of an IA of a site or the navigation or the goals of why a user is there. So I think that's one of those things where definitely get your hand on an IA book. I always recommend the Polar Bear book, which is Information Architecture for the Web and Beyond, as a great starting point in seeing how content transforms into these experiences. I also recommend Abby Covert's book on, oh my gosh, I'm blanking. I have the link I have the title in my deck, but I can't, I'm totally blanking right now.
Make sense of mess.
Yes. Thank you, Larry. So there's a lot of, so that's a great example of going from the editorial content strategy aspect of the writing and the tone and voice and producing materials to actually designing the experiences to support our users in that experience. The other, let's see, there was another one. It's going so quick now.
Lisa Maria Marquez is, oh, you're talking about questions. I was going to throw another book in. Lisa Maria Martin's book, Everyday Information Architecture, is really good.
Yes.
It's the newer of that genre.
Yes. That's a great one. If anything, there's a lot of resources. There's a lot of podcasts. There's a lot of community. I was heavily involved with the IA Institute in its early days in helping found it. And the IA conference is another one where if you want to really transition into those experiences, it's a good conference for learning others who are in that same world. Like, what is the navigation spaces? What's wayfinding? How do you structure the site? How do you structure the experience? And how does the information support that? Any other examples that people would like to unpack or have questions about related to making that transition? One of the big ones for me was going from content design to systems design. So in the early days of the web, everything was like, how do you navigate these static pages? And it was really quick, right? All our sites were fairly small. This is 20 plus years ago. And we can actually like say, oh yeah, that fits there. There's only 10 pages or there's only 50 pages. When I made the switch to systems design and structure and process, that was the part where I knew this is what had to happen for delivering content at scale. So I ended up seeing more content management systems being put in place. There were no metadata standards at that time, and there was no idea of content modeling. So if you get a chance, I would highly recommend revisiting one of the videos on the content modeling and on personalization, because those are key factors for a lot of dynamic delivery today and how you produce content for that. One of the things I've gone really deep into is taxonomy and ontology design and development. And in order to support a lot of the content at scale, building the skills using like Heather Hedden's book on accidental taxonomist and looking at how we structure information at a semantic level, that really is a ripe opportunity right now, or at least what I've seen in terms of places where I've been, like Facebook and now at Salesforce, and a lot of other places as well, where how do we develop these semantic structures to describe the content so that we can deliver personalized experiences and that we can get the right product to the right person in those e-commerce sites. I'd love to hear from others as well.
I was going to say, if folks want to unmute and elaborate on any of their observations or just ask Madonnalisa a question, feel free to unmute and chime in.
Hello, can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Hi. Yeah. So I just a quick, like, just the elaboration, because right now I'm in a weird position where I'm a tech writer, mostly editorial. Like I was a weird government hybrid, public information officer / tech writer, and I am struggling to find like positions that are kind of in my field. A lot of the tech writing I'm seeing is more like programmer writing, and so I'm trying to find anything that's kind of like not just editorial, because it seems those jobs you're either very far, like they want someone who's marketing or full in PR, or somebody who is software engineer who can spell, and I'm trying to find something in between, if that makes sense. So looking at maybe where to shift going forward.
That's a great question. I think there's a lot of folks who have been moving around in that space. I'm not very familiar with your particular area, because most of the tech writing I've seen have been like the software tech writing. But I would imagine that there might be others on the call who have similar experience, and would love to hear what they think about that area where we have tech writing and public information, and it's not marketing, but we want to develop resources to inform communities. Would that be more like, John, like if we were like, one of the volunteer work I do is I actually help a refugee information website restructure their content whenever there's new developments around refugees coming into a country, and getting them the right resources in their language that's most critical, especially based on their visa. Is that the kind of content you're thinking about, or is it more technical?
So I did that. I mean, just in kind of in a parallel way, I was in charge of a lot of the website and some of the messaging for COVID, where to find your test sites, where to get vaccines, kind of worked on some of our like public works programs, like how to pay your bills, how to sign up for permits, that kind of thing. So it was I'm very, like, a lot of it's like very kind of community oriented and kind of end user, and it's just I'm finding a lot of the software writing gigs now they're more like kind of writing for other developers, doing like the SDK API work. So that's why I was like, well, maybe I kind of should be looking more broadly, I guess, in my job search. So
Yeah, I think I'm glad you said the word community, and I think that's one of the biggest,
Oh,
not just that the topic is about community, but there's actually a lot of different software companies who are building up their community areas. And it's not necessarily, the end user is not necessarily a developer. So one of the things I've seen is just that uptake in just developing materials to help customers onboard to their product or users to onboard the product. So I would imagine in a lot of settings, they could be called content designers or content strategists, but then it's a matter of like, what's the setting? Like I saw Annika post here about customer support, where they need materials to support that area. But there could also be just content, community content for those different applications or the different systems that are out there. So it may not be technical writing, but it could be supporting that community and writing for them. Megan, did you want to talk as well? Okay.
I'm a student and I'm looking at moving from experience over into process, or at least sort of rounding off that space. I think right now I'm just sort of focusing on getting that real world experience and being able to sort of stretch my wings from there. I know eventually I'd like to be in a managerial role.
So going from experience to, I missed what you were targeting.
Oh, to process.
Oh, to process. Okay, so and you're a student.
Yep.
Okay, so in this case, have you taken any classes or internships that would be around the actual systems that would utilize, that actually power the experiences, like content management systems or assets management systems, or along that same, or even search engines? Have you been exposed to that kind of?
Somewhat. I interned at Uber this summer as a content designer, so I got some experience with their internal systems and the scope of that really large organization there. So that was super helpful. And then I study interactive design right now in college, so I'm getting a lot of I'd say the editorial experience stuff through class.
Okay, that's good to know. I think that's one of the things that's really amazing about doing those internships, is that you can actually hear more about what systems they're using and asking the questions about how does this work? What are the guidelines for entering this into the system? How do we establish the, even just the content operations workflow? I don't know if there's any content operations type folks on this call, but that's such a critical part that I don't think is being addressed in a lot of settings. Everyone is great at getting the content created and putting it on the site, but there's a lot of other things that need to be happening, like how does it get scheduled? Does it get taken down? How do we study the engagement? How do we get that information back to the person who needed this content? Is it achieving its goals? And I think a lot of content operations teams now are growing because they're realizing we've created all this content. We don't even know if it's working. And so I think that's one of the areas where the process part is starting to get more traction in the content operations world. So if you do find yourself in another internship, that would be a great way to learn more about that process of ideation, right? At the ideation part of content creation to the actual delivery and understanding of how it performed, and did it improve our KPIs or any metrics that the company might have around that content. That's an area that's definitely growing.
Yeah, I'm going to jump in just for a second, just because I think it's interesting that, it feels to me, and I'm curious about your opinion on this, Madonnalisa, and everyone else's, because it feels to me a little bit like, kind of a symptom or an indication of the maturity of content strategy as a role, as a profession, that, we've kind of figured out some of the sort of editorial and experience stuff. And now people really are understanding that if you're not also staffing for these, the kind of long-term governance and processes and running operations, that, you're potentially losing a lot of that good work, or, not not really investing in it kind of in its for the end to end of its life cycle. So I think it's interesting to me, and I definitely seems to be a bit of a trend in what I see in terms of job descriptions and so on, that that kind of operational, structural, almost more sort of technical end of things seems to be really growing in importance. I'm curious about your opinion about that.
Yeah, it is a need, right? Like there was a transition in my career where we went from, we need to just get that web page up to, oh, we need to put that into a content management system structured in a way that could be delivered in multiple places. And at the same time, who's cleaning up all the old content, right? The content that's no longer relevant or it's outdated or redundant, the rot. And that is when process really needed to come in. And I think a lot of teams, even design operations or design ops is a big thing too. It's just like there's a whole life cycle, and it almost stops right when it lands on a page, but nobody got to the point where like, oh, I think it's time to start getting rid of it. But they don't do that until there's a new redesign. Oh, that is old. We should take that down. But maybe that happened 5 years ago. So I think the content ops is great because they're starting to get more involved in how do you schedule this content? What's your theme for the year? So people who do have that editorial and content experience in their back pocket really can make amazing informed decisions for the systems design, right? Like here's the calendar, right? How can we integrate the calendar with how we've set up our themes and how all the different blocks of content align with those themes? And then how do we schedule it into the content management system over time, right? Like let's release it in this quarter or in that quarter. And so that you can have a series of content. Not only that, it may not just be text, it could be video and podcasts, right? Like that's the biggest amount of content coming out right now is video and podcasts. And so as a content strategist, that's still part of your purview is to like, what is that how is that content achieving our business goal, right? And how are we making it available and accessible and managing it with all our other text content? So content operations is very important. I think that's the way where we have all our skill sets in all 4 quadrants are so critical for that success, right? Like that full life cycle of the content.
Hey, Madonnalisa, I have a question of kind of in that same realm. Do you see content stuff being integrated much with design systems? That's a pretty fast growing thing on the design side.
Yeah, it is. So one of the things I've noticed in terms of the design systems is a lot of those things, they're trying to templatize, right? A lot of those experiences so that there's consistency, you're on the same brand, right? If a lot of that content is coming from some repository or even multiple repositories of content, like as we know in many businesses, there's lots of silos of content, those design systems actually have to map back to those systems. Like those design systems, whatever you see in the front end, has to map back to some of those systems where the content actually lives. And so a lot of us are probably, I would imagine in this call, has to work with like actually identifying the attributes of that content or do some of that really component level content modeling, which was represented in one of the talks a couple months ago. And where it comes together is really, okay, here's the design system. These are all the different patterns we know. Here's the content model or content schema. How do they come together? And I think one of the things we have to recognize too as content strategists, that piece of content can show up anywhere, right? Not just a website, but it could be in a chatbot experience, or it could be in an in-app experience. I think that's one of the things we're starting to see, right? Like your one piece of content may not be just landing on a web page of the corporate website. It could be a piece of content that be serviced as a knowledge article or as a support information or in an in-app help. So I think that's one of those things where we're learning so much right now. And I think a lot of the tools are starting to catch up in supporting that, making it easier for people like us to join up with the design systems.
Thanks.
Madonnalisa, I was curious, you mentioned seeing kind of a lot of call for people who can build semantic structures for the content. And I'm just curious, are you seeing that as like a skill set, or as kind of like something they would look to someone who also has some other expertise to kind of extend to that?
It's a marrying of that editorial experience with the structure. So if you have those 3 boxes in your bingo card, that's kind of like the intersection of, like, let's take example of voice activated experiences. Not only are you taking like linguists in the situation, you also need a taxonomist. And then on top of that, what is the tone and voice, and how is the content structured so that you can deliver it into those voice experiences, or even in a chatbot experience, right? So I think those are the kinds of things that I've seen a lot of that work happening. I mean, with Siri and Alexa and, you know, all those different types of tools, they need people who are content strategists. They know how the content is structured. They know how people will interact and engage with content. Also with linguists, right? Like, you work closely in hand with linguists to know what are the utterances, what are the things we should ignore, but what are the core components of that content and how people would describe it. I think our close, intimate work with words is a key factor in the success of a lot of those voice activated or voice command activated tools. So yeah, that's definitely something that, you know, if in your environment, you can explore that a little bit more, learn more how you can develop chatbot interfaces or voice activated interfaces, and see what those words are, the tone and voice of your chatbot, the structure of the content.
A follow-up question to that, Madonnalisa. I've talked a lot with a lot of conversation and voice and chatbot designers, and a lot of, especially the interactive voice stuff, is almost always like a black box. You know, that the content is happening with NLP, often some AI machine someplace that's generating the content, and there's seems to be, in many, if not most of those cases, little integration with like a CMS or even involvement of content strategists. Do you see that changing, or?
Yeah, I think when the experience fails and they didn't include like a taxonomist, ontologist, linguist, and a content strategist, it's pretty noticeable. So I think those are the kinds of investments that probably will need to happen in the future. Like, how do we build a taxonomy to just start? And then we'll grow into an ontology. What is our content? How have we structured it? I know a lot of people have legacy content that they can't necessarily convert into the new systems. But if you were to just kind of have a way to marry a taxonomy with that, and then see how the machine learning understand that, I think that would be a good starting point. But I think the black box situation is really challenging when, you know, there's no transparency. How would you build trust if there's no transparency? I think there's a lot of hard stuff in that. I think anything involving content understanding without any guardrails is a risk, right? So that's what we hope to do as content strategists, is in working with our UX partners, is how do we structure that content so that it is useful for our users and achieves our business goals? If that means deflecting from customer support, or if that means engaging them in new content that's dynamic and more interesting or helps with conversion, I think those are the kinds of things we should consider.
Cool, thank you. Hey, Annika, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. Posted a question in the chat. What are some ways to get noticed by hiring managers if you're new to IA? She has 6 months of experience as an internship building taxonomies, ontologies, and control vocabularies. And Annika, if you want to chime in and elaborate on that, feel free.
Sure thing. Hi, everyone. This is Anika. I asked the question, that's okay, about how to get noticed by hiring managers if you're new to IA. I've seen some roles open up, especially at Meta, where I have a coworker who used to work with me on PayPal who works there now. And lots of the roles will ask for about 5 years of experience, or 3 or 5 years. I have some ancillary experience in other types of work, but not really directly related to IA.
I think one of the things that will end up playing a good role in this hiring process is actually identifying your soft skills along with the hard skills. So what are some areas of your hard skills that you do know that can actually be transferred into this role, and maybe highlighting those keywords? I actually included a bunch of keywords at the end of the deck that I know relate to all the different quadrants. And so if those keywords will help like in your research or even in how you word some of the soft and hard skills in your resume, that could be a good starting point. It's no guarantee, but I think it comes back to, you know, content at scale. A lot of these recruiting systems, they have a big database of resumes, and they're probably looking for those keywords when they're looking for people for specific roles. So I hope that helps. If there's others on the phone call who have more experience with the actual hiring and recruiting, it would be great to hear your thoughts.
Awesome, thanks.
Hey, Madonnalisa, I have a question. Since ontology's come up a couple times, I'm curious. At the IA conference last few months ago, Peter Morville and Jorge Arango were doing a Q&A at the end, and I asked about where ontology fits in the current practice of IA. And I think it was Peter who said, "Oh, that's a dirty word. We don't talk about ontology here." And I was like, wait, what? I thought that was just, anyhow, do you have any thoughts on that?
It's funny because even at the taxonomy boot camp recently, there was also like, well, where's taxonomists in ontology? I think the reason why it could be a dirty word, and maybe I'll reach out to Peter again tomorrow to follow up, but I think it's because it involves a philosophy aspect of ontology, right? How do we define the world as we engage with it, or how someone defines it? But I think if in a business context, ontology could be a matter of defining your business processes, right? Or your business materials or business content, or what the process of your software is or your service is. I don't think it's the uber ontology of everything, but there's been a lot of great stuff coming out of electronic arts and how they've leveraged ontologies to actually support the gaming experience. I'm really fascinated by that because they created that web, that graph of just all the different ways users would interact with their game, codified it with this ontology, and then they're able to recommend additional games that would align with that person's actual experience in the other game. And they've done it in a slick way that I'm like, what an amazing way. That brings a delightful experience for that gamer, right? To be able to be recommended a game that's very similar and they know what kind of experience they had, and they can just surface that. I mean, that's the kind of thing that would be interesting and more. I would love to see more of that or be engaged in more of that. But it takes time. Yeah.
I could speak a little bit about like the hiring requirements.
Awesome.
It's really easy to assume that when you're reading these job postings, that if you don't fit the exact listing, that you're not going to be interviewed for that job. And it's simply not true. I've seen entry-level roles where you could be a senior content designer and never actually fit the requirements that they're looking for these entry-level positions, especially when you're looking at entry-level pay. I mean, I've seen roles that pay $50,000 a year and they're asking for, 10 years of experience. It's not going to happen. So when I'm looking at any position, I like to think about all of the requirements that they're asking for as a wish list. And if I'm meeting even a quarter of that wish list, and I might have other skills on the side that they haven't actually thought about needing, I go ahead and apply, and it works. I've not only applied for work like this, but I've also interviewed candidates, design candidates, but it's related. I've interviewed designers that do not check every box, but that we've ended up hiring anyway because they bring something special to the table that we didn't actually think about. And when they brought it to the table, we said, we not only want that, we need that. It's filling a need that we didn't even know we had. So when you're looking at your own experience, look at the things that make you special, or the things that you might be able to bring to the table that other people may not necessarily have, and take the advice to just really hit those hard in interviews. Yeah. This is what I specialize in, and this is what I have authority in. I can speak with authority on this subject. And having that ability to speak with authority on on an important part of your job is far more important than 3 to 5 years of experience.
That's an amazing insight, Heather, and I appreciate it. Thank you so much for sharing.
No problem.
I would also another tool that could help is mind mapping. I don't know if you're familiar. I know for a lot of writers, right? We start with the mind map when we start on a writing project. Could be the same thing you do for your resume, but instead of the resume, your output is like, what are my hard skills and soft skills, and identify it with like what job or role you had. And if you still have those job descriptions, that's really helpful too, to just pull out the keywords that were in there, or look for the job that you do want, look at the keywords, see where it aligns with your own skill set using a mind map, and just highlighting, how do these things connect? How can I make something that seems tangential actually really align? Yeah, I like that. So I think that's one of those things where it takes time. Just write it out, draw it out on the diagram. I think those really help to do more research on the keywords associated to that job role. Yeah, lots of great advice there. I love this. Like, I really think there's a lot of ways we can engage and continue the conversation. I highly recommend if we start a Slack channel, we can probably give each other a lot of the same advice. That's what community is for. And I'm so glad that people participated on camera, and sharing in the chat as well. We can move on unless there's another question. And then I have a couple more slides.
There was one more question, Madonnalisa.
Was there? Okay.
I think it's Elise. I'm not sure how to pronounce the name again, but they ask, in a number of content strategist job descriptions I've seen recently, SEO and SEM are listed as a basic qualification. Is this a growing trend of SEO tasks falling under content strategy?
This is where I see, all the different places I've been, SEO has been a question I have to field. So I may not have all the specialized knowledge, like on the technical implementation of a page or a tool that has to be delivered for SEO. But I think the most important thing to remember is that there are different people who actually are consultants and they serve that role, and that you can always reach out to them on, or read up on their articles on SEO or SEM. I think learning some of the basics are key, like how we use keywords and which tone and voice that we are using in those keywords. How do we place those keywords in your title or in the body, and knowing where to put it in the content itself. But it's not about stuffing your page either, right? Like, your first goal as a writer, as a content strategist, is to write content that resonates for your user, right? Like, you're writing to somebody, and we're not necessarily writing to a search engine, right? What you're writing should be relevant to the topic that you're, topic or a theme that you're targeting. So I would learn as much as you can from a lot of the online resources. Search engine land was something I think a lot of people were using back in the day. I don't know what tools are nowadays because I don't touch SEO so much, but one thing to remember is, if you do any accessibility, because it's a federal law now, right, to have your sites accessible. If you're doing a lot of those accessibility conditions for building your sites, you're already making it easier for your SEO. They kind of go hand in hand in an interesting way. So if your company doesn't have that, definitely read up on that and seeing how, accessibility and how SEO work together. Oh, thanks for the mention for Moz, Laura. Cool.
I want to just to kind of jump in, and we're at 7 o'clock. We still have a half hour to go here, but I want to make sure that there's time for Madonnalisa to get through the rest of her presentation. There'll be time after as well for more discussion, and of course we invite everyone to to join us in our Slack channel, which I know she belongs to. So it's a great place to kind of keep the conversation going. But thanks everyone for the great input so far, and let's see what else we can learn
just a few more slides and we'll get back to Q&A. But I wanted to remind you about, just lifelong learning. So you're starting, you have some next steps, right? You've done your value, you've done your vision, you've done your values. You kind of know where you want to go in those quadrants. Of course, there's all the books out there. And community. Imagine finding a book club or starting a book club within this community. Hey, what if we just picked up Designing Connected Content by Mike Atherton and Carrie Hain, two well-known content strategists, and just look at, hey, they're talking more about structure. If we're into that, maybe we should start a book club and talk about that book and how it relates to our work. Or any of the podcasts and videos. Like I know I have these in my list at the back of the deck, but there's a lot of videos right now just about taxonomy and knowledge graphs that I'm just amazed. I'm like, that didn't happen before. And now there's a couple of people who are actually developing this amazing podcasts and videos around IA, around content strategy. Even Brain Traffic, I think, has their own podcast. So I highly recommend engaging with that and engaging in community to discuss it, especially in the Slack channel. Of course, there's a lot of classroom online courses, certificates, and degrees. I think there's no shortage of that, I think, online. I think one of the things maybe in the Slack, we can talk about which programs people have tried and what they enjoyed, what they thought was most useful. I always hit up for any of the free stuff. I'm going to tout Trailhead, which is it's all free learning content. There's even I should have added this to the list. I think I did, but there's a whole trail around content operations at Trailhead, and you can learn like how Salesforce does it, and that's free and it's available. Hobbies. What are these hobbies that you have outside of work that actually can inform some of your own experiences as a content strategist? Newsletters. What are the influencers recommending you read? Those are kinds of things I kind of just dabble in because my inbox is really full. But still, if I have some downtime, I'm going to pick up a newsletter on check my inbox out and look for a newsletter talking about content strategy or IA or UX. And just where they're projecting is the future. And of course, I'm going to say mentorship, find a mentor. These are people who actually can help you. In many cases, they're free. And sometimes if you want to find a coach, like an official coach, has a little bit of a cost to it, but still, there's people who actually want to help you succeed and they want to help you find that next thing or get you excited about the work. So I definitely highly recommend that. In terms of, like I had mentioned earlier about hobbies, one of the biggest things I really enjoy is playing my ukulele. And I used to play with a big group before COVID. And that taught me, like, even my little ukulele in front of like 50 people, we can still find our voice in that big sea of voices. And so I think that's one of those things I'm learning, like, how do you stand out? How do you find your voice in that big sea? And I think Annika, that's one of the situations where, how do you play it with a little bit of a twang? Do you do just slightly different? What are the soft skills that can actually just make it different? The other thing I love doing too is I am a chocolate maker. So if we were in person, I would have showed up with a big box of chocolate because that's just how I am. One of the things I learned about chocolate making is that things take time, right? You either have to be going slow or you have to work really quickly. So I don't know if you've seen the School of Chocolate Netflix video, but they actually, you learn a little bit of like chocolate making and what's involved in that. I think someone's not on mute. Volunteer. I think I mentioned that a little bit. It's such a great opportunity to learn when you're volunteering as well. Like you might be bringing a specialized expertise, but in a lot of nonprofit organizations, they don't have all the roles represented, right? Like in a company. So people have to they wear two hats. And when you come in as a volunteer, you can actually learn a little bit more about these other areas that you can actually help out, and you're learning as you're doing it. And I think volunteering is one of those things where it brings so much satisfaction to your soul and your skills. And people will just really appreciate that. Lauren, you're pretty funny. I saw the chat. Yes, I am. I love chocolate making. And I will, when we all can meet, I will make some chocolate. Just remember, we're all learning from each other, and it's done in community. And I really appreciate being in this group right now that we can actually unpack a lot of this together. And so one of the other things too is just like, community can be at work as well, right? You can find those stretch projects. You can find other teams and present to them what you've learned. You can be in your own team and do little mini videos of what you're doing. I think everyone is always eager to hear what you're going to do or what you plan to do. And I think that's one of those opportunities at work still could be a good environment for that. One of the other things I do, even when I was in my consulting work, I do it also now as an FTE. I actually create an exposure list. So I don't know if you're familiar with that concept. It's something that I've seen in the management consulting world where people actually track their social graph of the people they interact with. So this would be like, I'm curious about what that person does. We're not in the same business unit, but I'm curious. So I just reach out and just message them and say, I'm curious about what you do, XYZ thing. I do this. I'd love to learn more about that. And then you just end up having a casual conversation. One of the things I use is like, I'm always curious when someone talks about knowledge graph or ontology or search or metadata. And I'm curious, I'll ask, tell me more about that. Do you have a deck? Do you have a project goal? Do you have something that I can see? And so I end up creating an interesting graph of my own making. And this comes back to networking, but I don't like calling it networking, but it's just, I really genuinely am curious about people's work. And I try to find opportunities where I can kind of align with them and see how I can help them achieve whatever their dream is. And likewise, they're curious about my work because I'm curious about their work. So there's almost this mutual dance that happens where we can actually share. And my outcome to that is if that person feels like someone is encouraging them and being their cheerleader and can actually feed them some interesting information, it's a great way for just building community within the company that you're at. And I highly recommend doing something like lunch and learns or getting together with people in a book club or finding stretch projects. Those are some of those things where has helped me a lot in a lot of places, even in consulting. I always love meeting people. I mean, who doesn't love having coffee, right? And sharing a meal when you're not talking shop all the time. Okay, so with all kinds of learning, we use different tools to help reinforce that new information. So at school, right, we had quizzes and tests and research papers to kind of just assess, what did you learn? What did you know? At work, we get feedback on our performance. But in your career, which is not the job, it's your career, there are ways that you can reinforce what you've learned. And I think this is going to come back to, can you write about it? Can you speak about it? Can you start first with your team? Teach them what you just learned. Have you thought of maybe even creating your own version of a TED Talk on something within the CS world? It may be just your friends and family as the audience, but who knows, that could help you boost your confidence in presenting it to other people or using that as a starting point for sharing with other people in the community. Speak at these meetups. I would imagine for Paula and Larry and Jim, like just getting people who have some topic they want to share. Teach us. I'm always eager to learn from folks. So, because you might come with a different lens to that topic, even if it's about something we've seen. You may be coming from healthcare. You may be coming from nonprofit. You may be coming from any number of industries that have a different take on that particular content strategy quadrant. I love that because it just makes us richer in our own understanding of content strategy. And of course, I'm going to tout, like, submit a poster, a lightning talk, a panel. World IA Days around the corner, and I think they're trying to get more cities involved. So usually Seattle has one. I don't know if I saw anything for Seattle for the coming year, but who knows, maybe we can find out from other folks who participated in World IA Day a topic that you might want to talk about. So those are the kinds of things that I'm thinking about in terms of like, how do we bring it back to the community? How are we sharing what we've learned and verify if that's the correct thing, or expand what we've learned. The other thing is teaching. So one of the things I've done in the past, I had a friend, she pushed me into teaching. She's like, I have these UX designers, they're second year undergraduates. They're learning the UI, they're learning interaction patterns, design, typography. No one's teaching them about systems thinking from like a metadata or taxonomy and content modeling perspective. Why don't you teach that class next semester? And there's an opening. And I'm like, what? And so I literally got thrown into a role at California College of the Arts, teaching undergraduates who are designers, UX designers, all about metadata and taxonomies and why it matters to the systems that they're building. And it was an amazing experience because it was a studio setup, and they were teaching me and I was teaching them, and we were in conversation and shaping each other's understanding of what it means to be a designer. This was the type of reinforcement that helped me really figure out, did I know my content? Were these students challenging me to actually convey it in a different way? So that lens was really helpful in shaping a lot of the things that I've come out of, and that was several years ago. Another way to think about teaching, and I don't know if anyone has done this, but there's the hour of code that a lot of schools participate in. There's a lot of scouting badges associated to our kind of work. So if you just reach out to those different organizations, that could be a great venue for like actually teaching what you know. I've done this with second graders. I taught them how search engines work and how important it is to qualify information. Not only did the teacher appreciate that librarian type person teaching that, but also just search engines, like what is being spewed at you, like, and letting them learn more about that. So definitely recommend, like, if you have the opportunity to teach, to see how you can do that. The other aspect of that is workshops at conferences. Is there a topic that you can pitch? I know the IA conference always opens up for workshops as well as a taxonomy bootcamp. So I'd love to see if there's folks who would want to share in that kind of setting. There's also degree programs and certificate programs. Paula, I think you have experience in that. I'm going to just mute for a bit, okay?
Well, she has a moment there. I will just repeat what I kind of put in the chat just to reinforce what Madonnalisa was saying about any opportunity to teach. Wow, if you don't know what you are talking about, I have not taught second graders, but I have taught undergrads and graduate students. And if you don't know what you're talking about, they will find those points. So it does make you, it kind of forces you to be on top of it, and especially if you're going out of your sort of core area of things that you tend to focus on, it's a good way to definitely a good way to make sure you're keeping up on the field.
Thanks for sharing, Paula. So suggested next steps: take time for self-reflection, carve out at least an hour. Invest in yourself. Start taking classes or read up in areas you want to grow, both soft and hard skills. Make your plan. I think that's the thing. What's your vision and your values for your career? Not just the job, your career, your whole self. Write everything down as part of that process, because that's going to be a great tool to use when you reflect again in the future, which reminds you, you have to do this over and over again. You can't just do one and done. Definitely put a list together of people who matter to you, like their opinions. They're going to give you that feedback that you really need so that you can move forward into that path that you're choosing for yourself. And then when you start making the new skills connections, share with others what you've learned. I think this is going to be, I'd love to see this happen. Like, folks on this call, if there's a topic that you want to learn about and then you become an expert, I'd love to hear you sharing about it. find community here within this content strategy meetup here in Seattle. I just think it's amazing that you're able to continue monthly programming. Even with COVID, everyone is coming to share and learn and want to grow, and definitely encourage others along their journey. I think that's one of the things that I care about. That's one of my values is I want to see people achieve where they want to go and help them figure that out. And I usually do informal talks or informal calls with people to just kind of encourage them along the way. So write down 3 things that you can do in the next 72 hours that will help you make those first steps. Is that setting a date with yourself? Is that taking the time to write a plan? Or finding what you need to know or who you want to be on your team? Or writing an outline for those ideas? I think those are some of those. Just write it down. Give yourself that gift of 3 things. There are so many others out there who want to join you on that journey or help you along. So just remember, don't do this alone. Find someone, find it in community. Thanks again for having me. It's been a privilege sharing some of my stories. And I think Paula has some things to share about meetups and mentoring.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Madonnalisa, and great lead in actually on that topic of community and sharing. For the folks who are hanging in here, we are hoping in this meetup as kind of part of what we're trying to do to sort of build out our community here. We're looking at setting up some sort of a mentorship program. So we would probably be starting fairly small just to kind of see how it goes. But Larry just dropped in the chat there a link to a survey. It's like 4 questions. We just kind of want to know if this is something that would be interesting to the group, and whether you want to be a mentor or a mentee, what topics are interesting. We'll be sharing this elsewhere too, but it would be great to know if this is something that's of interest to our community, because we'd love to find ways to kind of match up some of the people who, have experience or skills in one area and people who are interested in those, and kind of create some of this mutual benefit. So please, if that's of interest to you at all, click that link, go to that survey. We'll share it elsewhere too, but just wanted to mention that since it's so relevant to the presentation tonight. So if there are other questions, we've got just a few more minutes, and Madonnalisa is still here and would be, I'm sure, willing to answer if anyone else has other questions. And then if not, we'll wrap for the night. But a reminder that this is recorded, so we'll be sharing that. We'll be sharing her slides and all these great resources, including the ones that have been being dropped into the chat if they're not in her list. So with that, any other questions? If not, thank you all so much. We really appreciate it. I know this is a time of year when it's difficult to carve out an evening, but super interesting topic, and definitely encourage everyone to dive into all of the great stuff that's been shared, and wish you all continued success in your current roles or in searching for your next role and kind of deciding what matters to you in your content strategy career. Keep an eye on us. We will be back in 2022 with more events. So we hope to see you there. Thanks a lot.